Fast Company recently printed an article about the need to talk about neurodiversity in Black communities. And they noted that until we start talking about the challenges Black neurodivergent individuals face, our most vulnerable will not get the support they need to reach their potential and thrive. My guests today are Juniette Kanga and Maria Kennedy. Juniette is a mother of 5 children and a doctoral student at Bridges School of Cognitive Diversity. She holds a graduate certificate in twice exceptional education and is a trained social emotional needs for the gifted facilitator. Maria is director in the Bridges Educational Group. She's also a speaker, author, and advocate, and has been an educator for almost 30 years. I reached out to Juniette and Maria after they organized a neurocultural diversity symposium last year. They asked the question, what can we do to create more inclusive communities where students' needs are met? Today, we are continuing the discussion they started and talking specifically about how to meet the needs of culturally and neurodiverse 2E students.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Maria Kennedy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karen. It's an absolute honor to get to talk to you.
I'm so excited about speaking with you. I'm so excited because I have been on your webcast and we've had conversations online, offline, seen each other in person. And so I'm just excited to have you here to have this important conversation.
Definitely. And you are such a blessing. And every time I'm fortunate enough to get to spend time with you, I walk away with just so much more knowledge and just so excited to go, oh, I can go do that because Dr. Karen, yeah, let me go do that. And so,
well, I feel equally inspired by you. I mean, just the summit, we're going to talk later on about the symposium that you helped put together. And that was kind of what made me invite you to be on this podcast. I mean, I've wanted to talk to you about diverse learners in general, particularly 2E kids and kids from marginalized communities. And, you know, we're talking a lot about intersection on the podcast this year. And I just think there's just this increased need and desire to talk about the intersection, particularly here, of neurodiversity and ethnicity, talk about stigmas. There's so much to unpack. We may not get it all into this one conversation. We may have to have another conversation. I'm pretty sure we will have to have another conversation, but at least we can start the conversation. That's what I'm thinking.
And that's part of what we talked about is that you're so right, Dr. Karen. There is so much to unpack. There is so much going on. But sometimes we're kind of overwhelmed with the amount of stuff there is. But, you know, every journey starts with one step. And if we don't take a step, then we'll never get anywhere. And that's part of the reason that my friends and I got together for The Future is Inclusive. We were really painfully aware of the struggles that our children were having, which was very similar to the struggles we'd actually had as children. And so the question that we were asking was why? Why haven't things changed? You know, why are our children still fighting, to be acknowledged as even slightly intelligent? You know, why is it still expected that unless a child of color is an athlete, you know, just not seen as intelligent or not seen as gifted, you know? So where I'm from, if you played football, then yay, you know, then you would be seen as a little bit better, you know? But if, I guess here in the States, if you play basketball, then you're seen as a little bit better, you know? And possibly as a female, if you're a gymnast, then you might get a little bit of credit. really outside of those things, if you don't excel, our experience has been, if you don't excel in those areas, then often all they see is the shade of your skin. So whether you're Latinx, a Native American, whether you're black, green, purple, or turquoise, that's what they see first. And they're not looking for your strengths. A lot of our students are just labeled as a problem, as disruptive. Often, even their challenges aren't identified, so a student may be struggling with a learning challenge, and nobody wants to identify that. They just shove them away and say, you're a problem, I don't want to deal with you. And we're going, well, we battled that. So maybe it's time to start having those painful conversations. Maybe it's time to start putting it out there. And maybe it's time that we have to start to do something that's different, because, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So we figured, let's do something different. And
yes,
the symposium was as different as we could be.
Right. And I think that this is something that we need to do more of. We know that 1 in 5 people, that's in the United States alone, that's 75 million Americans, have a learning or a thinking difference, whether that's ADHD or dyslexia or a thinking difference like giftedness. And, despite how common these differences are, many neurodivergent individuals are not understood. They're misdiagnosed or not identified. A lot of times their differences, their difficulties are viewed as significant weaknesses or sometimes permanent. If you think about that fixed mindset, there's nothing that we can do. That's just who you are. And that's why, we've been talking about learning differences. Some of those students with learning differences have been identified as gifted or having a learning disability, or if they're twice exceptional, both gifted and a learning disability. But it feels like there still are a lot of stigmas around learning and thinking differences. And these are pervasive across ethnicities. And it's something that we need to talk about because, for Black children, Black and brown children, adolescents with learning disabilities, the stigmas are often twofold. One is that there's biases around race and ethnicity. And then also they're experiencing difficulties about how they learn, and there's stigmas associated with that as well.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, for parents, it's kind of, what do you do to help your child when you kind of really don't want to admit that your child has a challenge because your child is going to be labeled as that. I read something, and the young man said that he had dyslexia. I'm not dyslexia, so, and I'm going, yes, you have something that affects the way that you learn. That's not who you are, right? There's more to you than your learning challenge. And sometimes, or often, either the challenge itself will mask the other qualities that the child brings, or just nobody wants to look for them or even admit that they're there. And often for Black and brown children, unfortunately, it's the latter. Nobody has time to even think about, this child may be able to do other things. They just focus on what can't be done. And unfortunately, in education, we have this deficit model. And so teachers are told to look for what your child can't do, right? So remediation is something that has been not so much the driving force, but the stick to beat people with, right? So if you are struggling, for argument's sake, with your reading, and you read at a level below your chronological age, then that's all they focus on. How do we get them up to reading at grade level? Mm-hmm. And that's it. And we get them up to reading at grade level by giving them books that are below their intellectual level and expecting them to engage in them. And we go, so here is Peter, and this is the ball. Really? When I'm 10? Do I really want to read that? Yes, I might not have the phonemic awareness to decode, but that's not going to challenge me, and that's not going to get me involved, and that's not actually going to help me. And so a lot of the parents over the symposium were talking about what else can be done. What should we be doing to engage our children to identify, right, and then engage our children so that they can move to that next level. And remediation, we've got to get away from remediation because it's so restrictive. It's so restrictive. So if the only focus is on remediation, then we miss out on who that person is. And that's part of the key. That the whole weekend, people were talking about community, we're talking about identifying just who we are, who are we as people and what are our needs. And yeah, we're more than just a session on remediation. And we as the adults have got to get together and make that change, because apparently nobody's going to do it for us.
Right. And I love that you talked about, the need to remediate, but that's not, it kind of speaks to what you're saying about, I'm not just dyslexia. I'm so much more than that. You need to engage the learner, but then you also have to identify their strengths and talents. You can't just say, oh, we've identified where you're struggling. We have to pay equal attention to what they do well and nurture that in them as well. And that's why we sometimes miss kids who have this dual identity of being gifted and having a learning challenge, because we may focus on the learning challenge and not see the giftedness in that same child.
Exactly. We're so focused on fixing. We have to fix you. We have to fix you. We need to fix you. As I tell my parents, your child is not broken. We're not broken. We are people who think differently, and we need an education system that encompasses the way everybody thinks. This one size fits all does not fit all. That's the whole point. For years and years and years, we have been trying to cram these square pegs into round holes and then wondering why it didn't work. But these are amazing people who are not being able to reach their potential because we're not exploring the fullness of the curriculum that we're sharing and the fullness of their academic needs and requirements.
So oftentimes when I hear what you said, Maria, it's that it's not the child that needs to change. It's the system and the environment around the children. We need to, again, make our systems more equitable and more affirming of people who think and learn differently. And if we do that, then everybody's needs can be met. And it's not that we don't want remediation, because we know that that's absolutely necessary. If we think about things like dyslexia, it can move the needle significantly. We can have changes in the brain that connect to changes in the way kids read. They read more fluently, they read more efficiently, but that's not enough to do just that, is what I'm hearing you say. That we also need to engage our learners and boost their strengths, and sometimes help them to even and know what their own strengths are, because sometimes we over focus on the weakness and then we don't identify what their strengths and gifts and talents are.
Definitely. And for I would say for Black and brown children, that's key. Most of the students who end up joining our school have come from environments where they have been told how awful they are, what a problem they are to the world. And during our symposium, that's what those children, because we were blessed in our symposium the first day to actually have students come and share their stories. And that's what they talked about. They talked about the lessons where they felt included, the lessons where they were acknowledged as a person, and the lessons where they were valued. And one of the, and the overarching thing that came out of the symposium was that we really do need to acknowledge the difference, but really understand that difference isn't a bad word, that being different is beautiful, right? I don't know what everybody believes in. I believe in God. I'm not saying that people have to, but irrespective of what you believe in, I personally believe that you should accept that differences are beautiful. Every day the sun doesn't set and look exactly the same, but the sunset is no less beautiful or no less useful today because it's not beautifully orange. Tomorrow it might just be yellow, but it's still a sunset, and it's still important to the way the world turns and the way we as people will be able to continue to live on this planet. Because if the earth isn't turning, we're going to have problems. And so I feel that that's one of the messages that came out from our symposium, that difference is beautiful, that we should acknowledge and accept the differences in our neurodiverse community, and then build on those, identify what people do really well, and leverage their strengths to help them achieve who they're supposed to be. I mean, I don't know who's going to be the next I don't know what the next iPad, the next electric car. I don't know what the next thing that everybody wants is going to be. But what I do know is that if we don't continue as a community to encourage the growth and development of all of the people in our community, we may never get that next thing, because the person who's supposed to create it and invent it doesn't reach their full potential because we've spent so much time telling them what's wrong with them.
Absolutely. I want to say amen. I want to say amen. But Juniette, you've joined us. Please chime in.
I love that analogy, Maria, of the sunset, and that the sunset is beautiful no matter where it is, because sunsets are one of my favorite things. But even just for me, having grown up in Africa, the sunset is so different on the equator than it is here in the Northern Hemisphere. And if I were to talk about what a beautiful sunset is, it would be from a different perspective. So realizing that different is beautiful no matter where it is, whether it is over the savannah or over the snow-capped mountains that are outside my house right now. Though I wanted to just add to what you said with regards to where the next new invention and innovation is going to be coming from. When you look at the last census done in about 2 years ago, they identified that the majority of the population that is a student right now is going to be, by 2045, when they become adults, is going to be 50%, or rather about 46% white, and the rest of the percentages will be a mix of Hispanic, biracial, Black, and a small percentage of Native American. And the fact that we'll be having this huge percentage that will have changed in terms of the US, then we do need to be thinking about how that intersectionality of neurodiversity, where they're very innovative, plus their cultural diversity comes in, and we are able to mold and nurture that. And I think a lot of these companies, these tech companies in the Bay Area that we're fortunate to live in this area, are focused on, have noticed that trend and have noticed that they can get great workers from that. Microsoft has their different programs right now for those who are autistic. A lot of tech companies have begun to hire for that. I've even seen advertisements that there's this huge advertisement at one point with a creative agency that showed Steve Jobs on it and said, non-dyslexics need not apply. I mean, that was kind of pushing the buttons there, but just knowing that creativity and that mind is a huge strength and will be able to work for these children in terms of achieving their potential. So that is something that we should be looking at, is how do we tap into this creative, able to think outside of the box potential that has also had different cultural experiences that helps them be able to lead in a global world, since we are becoming a very global world.
And I love that, because those cultural differences are such an important piece of what we bring to the table. Right? It's that uniqueness and the neurodiversity and the cultural diversity that is needed, as we think about our current state of affairs globally and then moving forward. Fast Company just printed an article. I don't know if either of you saw it, about the need to talk about diversity in Black communities, and noted that until we start talking about the challenges that Black neurodivergent individuals face, our most vulnerable will not get the support they need to reach their potential and thrive. And that's what we're talking about, right? We have to understand it. We have to understand it in order to know how to embrace it and how to make sure that everyone has equal opportunities to, again, reach their full potential.
Yeah, and I think apart from just understanding is the fact that for me as a parent of some neurodivergent individuals is the fact that we are afraid. We're afraid to bring it out because we want to protect our children. And I know like many times I wonder, when my son goes to pick up little rocks when he was younger, and I'm like, no, you don't pick little rocks outside people's houses because first, you're Black. They don't know that your brain is different and that you're thinking of what all these rocks could do to soar in the sky. So we're constantly trying to protect them, but we need to be able to educate ourselves on what the beauties are and how we can be able to embrace that within the community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we had talked about that before you jumped on the conversation about the fact that, oftentimes Black and brown children and adolescents are facing, double stigma, right? There's because of the biases around ethnicity and biases around, kids who think and learn differently. And we know from the research that, that white children are twice as likely to receive an ADHD diagnosis as Black children. And we know that Black students are more likely to receive disciplinary removal, from class than all other students with disabilities because of acting out, which is oftentimes impulsivity related to undiagnosed ADHD, poor self-regulation associated with either ADHD, autism, or some other neurodivergence. And we need to be able to identify our own biases, the biases that are in the system, and teachers have to acknowledge their own conscious and unconscious biases in order to address that and make sure that more of our young people are identified and get the support that they need. And so that they are understood, but then again, they have the opportunity to thrive just like anyone else.
You're so right, Dr. Karen. Our inherent biases, the ones that we actually are aware of, still mask the ones that often we're unaware of. And
right.
Often teachers, I've met teachers, and I've been a teacher and an educator for 30 years, so I'm speaking from my personal experience. But often teachers claim that they're frightened of the children, right? And often because of that, because they've heard that this child did something. Child didn't need to do it in their room. They've just heard that a Black male or a brown male did something. And so sometimes without realizing it, they project that on the next Black or brown male that they meet, that they're going to do this. And so the second the child does some minuscule minor thing, they get sent out. I have been telling this tale of my 3-year-old child, right, for the last 20 years.
Please tell it, because people who might be listening may not have heard it. So please.
So my son, age 3, was sent out of class. Now, he was the cutest little thing on the planet. The 3-year-old was sent out of class and sent to the principal's office for refusing to do an assignment that was set for the class. Now, age 3, my son was doing single-digit addition, knew and could say and write all of his numbers in excess of 100, both forwards and backwards, was counting to 20 in French, both forwards and backwards. The kids in his class were doing the number 3, and they asked him to sit and spend time drawing circles round 3 balloons, 3 balls, 3 bats. My kid looked at the teacher and went, I don't want to do that. He was removed from the class and sent to the principal because the 3-year-old identified that the work was beneath his intellectual level. The teacher didn't ask him why he didn't want to do it. He was sent straight out. He was 3. I'm going, what fear could you possibly have had of a 2-foot-nothing 3-year-old? She did not stop to find out why he did not want to sit and draw around 3 balloons. And it wasn't until I came in later on that day and spoke to her about it, and her response, I'm going, she's lucky that I'm an educator, because I really wanted to slap her. Her response was, because I said, but he's doing, single digit addition, and we're working on carrying now. So if you just give him a sheet of sums, right, he'll happily sit there and figure them out. She goes, oh no, we can't do that because we're doing the number 3. We're doing the number 3 that is beneath the 3-year-old's intellectual level. You send him out because he doesn't want to do something because you're frightened he's going to become disruptive. Mark, the child did not become, he loved school. He adored school. He loved going to learn something. That's why he went to school. He had gone to daycare beforehand and had some amazing people who loved to work with him and teach him stuff. So his understanding of going to school was the place you went to learn something you don't already know. Plus, he's got a mother who's a teacher, right? So he went there to learn. He did not go there to be disruptive. But because he was a little black boy, that was where the teacher went. And I'm going, and so for me, it was really disappointing. And the public school system, and I worked in the public school system, and I had been a proponent of public school education. But when, so my son's therapist, we took him to a specialist, make sure that everything was fine with him. And he said, you got to get him out of that school because that school's going to kill him. It's going to squash his joie de vivre, his desire to learn, and he's not going to do well in that environment. Get him out. And so then I had to take on the burden of sending the child to private school as a single mom, right? Which was something that I didn't want to do. But as all moms, when it comes down to your child, you're going to do everything that you can. But every parent isn't in a position where they can send their child to private school, and they shouldn't have to. Our public school system needs to provide sufficient, adequate, growing education for all of the children that attend, whether they're brown, whether they're green, whether they're black, whether they're purple, whatever culture they come from. The education system should be geared to take them to the next level. Education should not be about keeping people here. Education should be about growing, about learning. One of my favorite cartoons is the one that's attributed to Einstein, which I'm told he never actually said. But there's the picture of, I think it's like a fish and going up.
I know what you mean.
Thing, yeah, and it says everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid, right? And for me, I'm going, education needs to be culturally aware. Education needs to look at the needs of all of the children in the classroom, So what that tells me, what that idea says to me, is that when we're assessing our children and assessing their needs, we need to have an assessment that is culturally aware so that we can make sure that we're looking at the whole child, we're seeing the whole child. Because that's what a lot of people said over our weekend symposium, was that they were not seen. They did not feel seen. Occasionally, a child was seen by a teacher. And when they were finally seen by their teacher, that made a huge difference. So we need an education system. We need assessment instruments that are culturally aware, that identify where all of those children truly are, and then where they should be going. So where are we now? What's the next step to move them on the education continuum, to add value to them so that they can go on to be contributing members of our society and not as happens a lot, continue to be ostracized, continue to be alienated, continue to be seen as a behavior problem because you asked a question. I had a kid who got into trouble every day in the class the year before he came to me. And when he came to me, I'm going, hey, kid, what's going on? Because I don't know. I just wanted to know. And so I ask a question and I get into trouble. I said, ask me anything you want. And he looked at me like I was an alien. I'm going to ask me anything that you want, anytime that you want to know something. This kid thrived in my class because he was allowed to ask questions because I was not threatened by his questions. Guess what? I don't need to know the answers to your questions. What I do know is how to find the answers to your questions, and that's the difference. Often as educators, my experience has been that they meet gifted, smart, intelligent children, and they assume that when a child asks a question that they're threatening their authority, instead of what's actually going on in that child's mind, which is, oh, I want to know, how does that work? What do you do with this? What's the next step? You know, smart, intelligent children are curious. They ask questions, and educators need to be open to answering questions or helping children find answers to those questions. And as adults, we need to ask more questions so that we can move this thing forward, so that we can create community. Community is key. And so I think as adults, we need to be less frightened of being seen as crazy. We're going to be seen as crazy anyway.
And I think that goes back to your point about needing to engage students. And that means meeting them where they are and recognizing what you've described as the gifted child. Not only, you know, we're on this podcast, we talk about learning and thinking differences. And so it's not always a child who has a learning disability or a learning difference. It could be a child who is identified as gifted, but maybe gifted, but not identified, right? Because these are the kids who are pushing boundaries, who are very curious, who may appear bored in the classroom and then suddenly become disruptive because they don't want to trace the number 3 because they can, you know, write to 300. And so we have to, again, understand and then engage and be flexible enough to change the lesson plan to meet the needs of the students, because then they're more motivated to learn. They stay curious. And we know that in Black and Brown students who are gifted, some may even hide their intelligence because they want to fit in socially. And we don't want that to happen. We want them to be proud of their high intelligence and their curiosity. And we don't want them to pretend that they can't do things just to fit in or because, you know, their questions are being shut down by the teacher. So they stop asking questions. We want them to keep asking those questions.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things that I just wanted to add to that is also on the flip side, when there's novelty, just how bored they get, like you mentioned with your 3-year-old. And novelty is the first rule of engagement with any twice exceptional child who is both gifted and learning and has a learning difference. And it's really common for teachers not to want to differentiate, not to provide that dual differentiation because it's too much work. And I get it. There's a lot of administrative. However, you find the teachers that I've found throughout my experience has been the places where my child thrives the most is where the teacher had been willing to differentiate and had been to dually differentiate, to be able to say, okay, because you read through this book too fast, I'm going to let you do XYZ so that you can move ahead than the rest of the class. Because I know you're not going to write any notes at the same time, since you have challenges with just the ability to be able to handwrite. I'm going to let you either record it or figure out a different way to be able to express it, or I'm going to interview you. And that is where the child has thrived. And it's interesting what kind of trauma children end up with, because this problem of writing started in first grade, for example, with my own child and with other children that I've met along the way, particularly of Hispanic heritage. But then now in 9th grade, this was first grade, in 9th grade, recently, just last week, I gave him a creative writing module to begin because now he's homeschooled. And he said, oh, I don't like this. And I asked why. And he said, because you might not let me go ahead. And I said, you can move as you wish, so long as I get the assignments completed, you may move as fast as you wish. And now it's his favorite class. He'll do like 3 hours without being forced, because there's a novelty around it, plus an interest in books, which he started reading when he was 2 years old. And on that note, when children are found to have a certain gift, I think there's also, for us as parents, not just as teachers, there's a hesitation to accept that they're gifted. It was really difficult culturally for us to be able to break through and accept that. I think we still hold back and try to avoid, because we don't want them to, get a blown up mind or just become arrogant. Yet at the same time, yes, he did start reading. He was hypolexic, started reading at 2 years old. From kindergarten, they used to turn the bookshelves around to avoid him reading until he found a kindergarten teacher that was willing to let him read during class. And that has been the constant narrative is, your child is so sweet. They seem so intelligent and capable, but they're always reading under the table and we don't know how to manage that behavior. And there was just a huge focus on stopping this reading rather than how can we leverage this reading to be able to access other ways and scaffold for other ways to be able to learn, because he has all this knowledge in his head. And we've constantly been in that place. So I think there's just the ability for teachers to figure out how to, provide that dual differentiation perspective, and also to scaffold in the things that they struggled with while using their interests as to be able to get them started in any learning.
Definitely.
That's so wonderful. Leveraging that curiosity and that interest, in a way that can be, acknowledged, continue the motivation for reading, but have it not be a distraction in the classroom so that he can engage in the content that's being presented. And again, you have to see that. You have to see, the why. Why is he reading? And then seek to engage that child.
Definitely. And I think one of the other keys to that is teacher training. So teacher training has to be key. Our teachers need to learn what to look for. What are the signs that the child is actually bored rather than avoiding? Because, I'm not saying that every Black or brown child on the planet is highly gifted and that all the teachers need to change what they're doing. There will be some who are avoiding because, well, maybe they find it hard. Well, why are they avoiding? So we need to be trained to look for the signs so that we can rightfully or accurately identify what the needs of our children truly are. And by our children, I mean all children. White ones, black ones, green ones, all children, every child in the classroom. Because one of the things at our school that we talk about is that strength-based teaching is for everybody, right? So our children are, I work with a population of 2 each students. So they're highly gifted, but have that learning challenge. But the way we address education is actually a great model for all children, right? So as Juniette says, we allow our children to demonstrate their learning in a multitude of ways, right? So it can be writing, it can be talking, it can be an interview, it can be making a movie, it can be drawing a whole animation cartoon series. How you share your learning often impacts whether or not a child wants to continue to learn. And if there is only one way, and if that one way is in the area that child struggles, then you're never going to get the best out of them. And so teaching teachers through professional development, what other strategies they can use in the classroom and how to accurately identify the needs of all of their students, I think will definitely move us forward. And then within the classroom, we have got to create opportunities for peers to learn about the other cultures, because if they can grow up in an environment, and I know children spend more time with their parents than they do in the classroom. However, the classroom teacher has more influence on those children than their parents. My kid will come home and tell me, well, my teacher says, And I would go, well, your teacher's wrong because I'm a teacher. But all parents can't say that because they're not necessarily teachers. So teachers have to be aware of the great influence that they have on those students that are in their classroom, and enable those students to find out about the cultures of the other children within the classroom, so that we can really grow up in an environment where we can see people as people, and that it's okay that Fred over there is not doing the same math as me, but that doesn't make me less of a person because I'm not doing the same as him, right? Fred's great in mathematics, so that's why he's being accelerated. But I might be great artistically, and so in the art class, I'll be accelerated. Identifying where our strengths are, where our gifts are, and where our challenges are should be part of our daily interaction within the classroom, so that we can understand that those differences are okay, and that together in our community, we can grow and move forward.
You know, this has probably been one of the most important conversations I've had on this podcast. And, you know, I really value the contributions you've both made to this area. You know, just the idea of hosting a neuro and cultural diversity symposium is so needed. And I hope that you will do it again, because we do need to create more inclusive communities where students' needs are met. And we have to develop, like you both have said, a broader, sustainable support community. And I just appreciate you both for being here, for sharing such valuable information with our listeners. I know this will not be our last conversation. You're shaking your head no. But what is the best way for listeners to connect with you if they want to follow up with you, have more conversations, maybe invite you to come to their school and speak about these issues? Who wants to go first?
Okay, I can go. So one of the things that we did right after the conference was to set up an email where they can reach us, and that is simply inclusive@bridges.edu. We also have a Facebook page that we'll be launching next month. Our goal is really three things. That one, we want to be able to connect you, we want to hear you, and we want to be able to empower you. So we are looking at creating what we call cross-cultural Future is Inclusive pods, so that people are able to have discussions every month with affinity groups with regards to, you know, just broadened discussions about being at that intersection of neurodiversity culture, but even just being able to cross-culturally be a melting pot and a place for resources and ideas. So that we can be able to just grow the movement. So this isn't about whether you are ethnically different. It's about that everyone has a culture. It doesn't matter who you are, and that we want to be able to cross that culture, those cultural barriers, and have conversations about ways in which we understand each other better. So we do hope that people will sign up for that. We also want to be able to hear from people's stories about how they can be able to inspire others. Therefore, if you have a story that you'd love to share, please email us, and we will begin to look at how we can publish your story so that others can see themselves in your stories, since that was something that came up quite a bit with different cultures. Every single parent that was there from various cultures said, I wish I could have found somebody else that was going through this with me. And just being able to create that community. And then, Maria, do you have any other suggestions?
Reaching out. So creating a community is key. But like I said at the beginning, every journey starts with a step. So if your first step is to reach out to us, we will help you create that community, right? We want to empower people. We want to improve educator awareness. We want to be the sounding board and a communication avenue for everybody. So reach out to us, ask us questions, share who you are. We are more than happy to come and speak at events, because that's what we're looking forward to doing. We are looking at doing some research and collecting data, so that we have some data to present maybe at conferences. So if you've got a question, if there is some way that you feel that we can help you, then we just want you to reach out to us. And that's inclusive@bridges.edu.
And lastly, we want people to volunteer ultimately, just because Maria and I cannot do it all with Marna. We're just three of us. And we are just three unique cultures. There are more cultures out there. So the more that you can volunteer your skills, your strategies, your ideas, your experiences, whether you're an educator, a professional, or a parent, then we will be better together, because community is about our differences coming together and being able to create a movement together.
Wonderful. And I will be sure to put a link to your contact information in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to our next conversation.
So do I. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. And I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Maria and Juniette. Be sure to check out the show notes so you can reach out to them directly. We are already planning a summit for this upcoming year. And if you would like to be involved or participate, please reach out to me at drkiwilson@childnexus.com. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.